Hi, it's Dre Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom. Today we discuss, is debt ever okay in retirement? The reality is it depends on a variety of situations, and we're going to discuss them today to know whether debt makes sense in your own individual retirement. I do believe high level when we discuss this, a lot of people will just say yes or no. And I think in a lot of ways, they don't want to confuse you. And in my mind, I'm very optimistic. I believe that when people have the best information, they can make the best decision for their own unique situation. And because of that, when it comes to answering this question of debt, I'll go over 4 ways that it's probably okay. I'll go over 4 situations that it's probably not okay. And when it comes to your own unique retirement plan, we almost always start with what is the type of debt that we're talking about. The next thing we normally consider is your own unique financial situation. And then third, we talk about how does debt fit in your overall retirement plan. And when you're answering those questions, it normally gives us the clarity to know whether debt makes sense in your own retirement plan. So let's start with 4 ways that debt can be okay. First and foremost, if you have a low interest rate mortgage, if we're saying the debt's not okay, then we're basically saying that we got to pay our house off. And for a lot of people, your mortgage and your retirement are your two biggest expenses that you're going to have: buying your financial freedom, and then the place that you have as your shelter. As a result, there are tax incentives in both of those instruments that if you're investing for your retirement, because the government knows that that's most likely one of your highest expenses, they incentivize you in many ways where you can defer taxes or have tax-free income. And that's also true with your home where you can write off interest and different things. And also our society as a whole rewards people that has home ownership. And so there are lots of ways that you can have a low interest rate mortgage and you can work that in your overall favor for your retirement plan. And naturally, if you have a choice, and we'll go into a little bit later on the negative side of things, but if you have the ability where you're sitting there and your mortgage payment is relatively high for what your monthly income is going to be, there is always the option to refinance your home, hopefully for a lower interest rate. But if you have a longer term, you can have it as a smaller portion of your overall retirement plan. And then one of the cool things that most people don't really talk about is if you're able to set up a 30-year mortgage payment that was maybe $2,100 a month, or you can have a 15-year mortgage payment that is maybe $2,800 a month. You have the ability to choose a 30-year and then pay the 15-year. And one of the cool things that ends up happening is you have your overall mortgage payment, and that is set at what is your principal and interest. So that $2,100 is already calculating your principal and interest. And instead of you having that at the $2,800 for a 15-year, now it's only going to be the $2,100. Well, if you pay the 2,800, what is that extra $700 considered? You are correct. It would be 100% considered a payment on principal. And so as a result, if someone is able to pay the $2,100 that has principal and interest, and then every month $700 goes straight towards principal, you can see how that can speed up your ability to pay off your mortgage. It also gives you the flexibility that if you have a down month in your retirement where you just don't have the 2,800, you've given yourself the payment requirement of 2,100, and you could take off that $700. You don't have to pay that. It would not be going into default. You wouldn't have a late fee. You would have none of that. And so now you have a lot more control and flexibility in your retirement. And you guys know that I'm big on making decisions that gives you the control and flexibility to be able to say, you know what, I don't want to pay that $700 this month mortgage. I want to take a trip with that $700. Or you can say, I don't want to pay that $700. I want to put that amount towards something else. And you have that option that's available. But it starts with having low interest rate mortgages. Number 2 on our list is investment leverage. And that's a very fancy way of saying that I don't want to have to sell my investments in a down market, but I still have to fund my retirement life either way. And that means that you would have to have an additional stream of income coming from somewhere that is not tied to whatever your asset that is losing value in a recession or a down market as a whole. And for most people that are invested in the stock market, you know that once every 10 years, we're likely to have a recession. And if you're taking out that 4% every year, you don't have many options available. But if you had real estate or a home equity line or something like that, now you're able to say, all right, when the market is down, I don't have to take that loss this year. I'm able to leverage my home equity line or some other loan in general to where now I don't have to touch this money in a down market. I can let that recover instead of you possibly losing 5, 10 years off your retirement because of things like sequence of returns, which is a very fancy way of saying that my money is losing value more the first year. And so it's almost, instead of me being taken out a 3 to 5% withdrawal rate, it's more like I have a 10 to 12% withdrawal rate because I'm losing a rate at maybe 5 to 6%. And then I'm withdrawing at a rate of 3 to 5%. Well, you combine that together and it's like you have a 10 to 12% withdrawal rate. You and I naturally would know, well, obviously, if you're taking out 12% from your investments, that's not going to last your whole retirement. And it's true, which requires us to have an additional stream of income that is set up separate from that. So, for example, if someone had real estate, you have rental income. And unless it's something like COVID where they're not paying their rent and we're being squeezed at the same time, we know that for the most part, you can keep that rental income coming in where there might be a recession in the stock market, but ideally the people that are tenants, they are able to maintain their job and maintain their payments. At the same time, you wouldn't sell your home in a recession. So you wouldn't sell one of your investment properties because you know that the value has been going down. You gave yourself the flexibility to say, all right, I'm going to maintain my income, even though I was planning on selling that property. I'm not going to sell the property anymore. And again, what you're realizing is it really comes down to flexibility. We know that having at least 3 streams of income, it says that 65% of self-made millionaires have them. And that there are 7 streams of income that they recognize in general. And so we have to choose which 3 make the most sense for us. And ideally, we have a stream that is going to perform well when another stream maybe isn't performing well. Almost like diversifying your investment portfolio, you can diversify your income streams as well. Number 3 on our list is 0% or low interest auto loans. If you need a new car and you don't want to have that hole in your retirement plan where you're funding it with straight cash only, like $30,000 to $50,000 that just comes right off the top of your retirement funds, you can get a 0% interest rate car loan, which, as you know, means that you're just basically paying the setup fees, whatever the points is that they charge to set everything up. But then every single month you can make your payment and it's the same as paying in cash, except for now you give yourself the ability to have a little bit more flexibility where you don't have $50,000 missing from your retirement. In many ways, it's like taking a loan from yourself, except you don't have to recognize the money being removed from your account. So now you still have the $50,000 that's in your retirement account, and that money is still growing. If you really think about it, you could literally be making a car payment from just the interest that your money is generating from the investments because I didn't have to sell my investments. I still have those assets and they're still generating an income stream. And because it's generating this additional income stream, the fact that I have a 0% interest rate, it then gives me the ability to have more money than I would have had. And I'm still able to pay off that debt. In a lot of ways, when it comes to debt, ideally, it's either going to make your retirement life better or it doesn't change it at all. And that's normally going to be a great opportunity. Now, granted, you'll notice that in each of these situations, we're really focusing on the idea of having installment debt. Outside of the home equity line, which would be considered revolving, which is credit card debt, you have an installment debt in the sense that it's a set monthly payment and it has a set interest rate. And that set interest rate has principal and interest already built into that monthly payment. And that gives the ability to plan a little bit more securely. I know what the monthly payment is, and I know what my average return is going to be, and I can see what makes the most sense for me. And that leads us very well into number 4, which is business or real estate loans. I have had great loans where like a 0 going to 2%. I've had what we would consider bad loans with a 29 to 36%. But the way I decided what made the most sense for me is the return that I'm going to get from that investment. And so I remember when I was starting my first above board registered with the state business, and that was a photo booth company. And we did weddings and all sorts of events, but the photo booth was $8,000. That's how much the booth cost to be made and sent to me. And so I bought 2 booths and I went out and I found a loan which would probably be considered a predatory loan because it was a crazy like 32% interest rate. But I knew that if I got the money and got those booths, I was able to generate hundreds of dollars every single weekend, if not thousands of dollars every single weekend. And that's exactly what I did. And I talk about it in my book, Wealthy Retirement Wisdom, where I share the screenshot of the statement. And you can see that my monthly payment on $21,000 was like $950 every single month. And so some of the early months before I was able to generate any business, I was literally taking my 32% loan and I had the $21,000 and then I paid that month's payment with the money that they gave me, right? Obviously that's not how you want to do things long term. But once I got the business going and I was able to generate money, I was able to pay that loan off. And so in my mind, I was like, all right, if I get this money and then I'm able to do 2 events every weekend, my wife does one event, I do the other event, and we're able to generate like $1,000 every weekend, then in 21 weekends, I would be done. And I was like, all right, well, That's probably a little bit too aggressive, Dre. So let's say you just do like one event and maybe every so often you do two events. Anyways, the numbers worked out where it wasn't a question for me of whether 32% was a good or a bad deal. It was a question of what I was going to do with the money. And so when you're looking at a business loan, what is that going to generate you? And if you're buying some equipment, like let's say you got a loan for $150,000 and you wanted to start a food truck business, and you say, all right, well, this is what I need to get started, and then every single weekend I'm able to operate this business. It's going to generate me income for my retirement, and I could pay that loan off. Well, that math would mean that your return on investment, right, which how much I invested versus how much I made, that it makes sense. Mathematically, it makes sense. And so when you look at real estate, that's another way that we look at real estate. If you're going to have an investment property and you're able to put 20% down, and now you have the full property, we call that leveraging your money, right? You only put 20% down, but you get access to the entire amount. So let's say the house was $100,000 to make life easy for me. And then you put down $20,000, you now own a $100,000 property. And as a result, you can rent it based off of the $100,000 value of the property. So you have leveraged that $20,000 into being able to access this income stream. And so if you charge someone $1,000, $2,000 every single month in rent, and then you have the person living in there, well, you know that in that mortgage rate, even in the higher mortgage rate environment that we're in now, that you're generating a return on that asset. And so in those situations, I would normally say that that is debt that is okay to have. That I know what I'm going to do with this money, how it's going to make me more money, generate the income stream that I'm looking for, either retirement for lifestyle or my overall financial freedom. And I'm going to be okay with that math. And for me, I try to remove the emotions and I just want to make a mathematical decision. I'm not excited by the fact that the interest rate was 32%, but I was excited by the fact that you gave me $21,000 so I could start my business. And it's one of those weird things that we have in our society where I could go out there and I can get a student loan. I can get hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans, but I couldn't get a tenth of that to start a business. And you really sometimes have to think about the way our system is designed, how we decide winners and losers, and the way that we can have money to get a degree, but you can't have money to start a business, where our credit comes into play for a variety of situations, but for some reason it's okay in the operation of a student loan. And you really do have to just kind of sit back and think very hardly, why does our society incentivize that? And how does that help me in my goals? And for me, I think that the biggest reason the government incentivizes student loans is because the return is not as high. And the government works better when people are working. And you see, and we're going through it now, where I don't think that the big thing is, oh, we just want people to go back to work because we want people to go back to work. Economically speaking, I believe they want people to go back to work because that function is a huge part of the economic growth of most cities. If you just sit back and think about getting gas at a gas station, if you just sit and think about the tickets that the cops are going to give people, and when people pull off on the side of the road to stop to get food, or they go into the office, and then normally we have company events, and then we have to bring caterers in, or we stop and get gas, or we go out to lunch with someone, that you can see that the function of just driving to and from work is a huge economic stimulus for an entire city. And that when people aren't driving, then they're not getting oil changes, they're not getting tune-ups, they're not buying as much gas or eating out at restaurants as much. And even when you take another step back and you just talk about the fact that the government has millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars worth of buildings that no one was in, and they're making payments on. And that's true as far as commercial real estate as a whole, that there are tons of people, tons of businesses that own commercial property that no one was sitting in. And so now you're trying to figure out from an economic perspective, do I have a depleting asset? Is it true that owning commercial real estate was a bad investment? So ultimately, take a step back. I just think more or less people just sat back and said, you know what? If that's what the decision is, tell these people to come into the office. Now, granted, I don't think it was in their best interest to be like, oh, we care about culture, and you're sitting there still having team meetings in the office with the person on the other side, and you're not actually in a conference room. You're still on the Zoom call. There, I don't believe that that's the way that they should have went about it. But they didn't want to say, because we're losing money owning this building, that the society as a whole benefits from everyone being required to spend money on gas and tune-ups and oil changes and being required to drive and be stuck in traffic. And then maybe a cop can give you a ticket. I just think that they don't want to say that. So they say, hey, let's just tell them it's for company culture. And sure, they'll be mad at it, but it's okay. And I really do. And I always have these discussions where for me, it's always a question of the economics. It is 100% of the time follow the money and you will understand what we're trying to do more than not. And just like the government and society as a whole decided it did not make a lot of economic sense for people to be able to work from home in large groups, we also have to recognize it doesn't always make economic sense for us when it comes to all debt. And all debt is not created equal. We have significant mortgage payments. So when we're talking about a mortgage payment, while there is a plus of having a mortgage debt, it does have to be within a certain percentage of your income. And when you're talking about getting approved for a mortgage, when you have a job versus your retirement income, which is probably going to be lower than the income you had from your work, that means that you have to reevaluate your mortgage. That if your mortgage is now 40%, 50% of your monthly payments, then that is debt that is probably not good to have. Even though there is some savings and taxes, or we have other opportunities to leverage our house in different ways, if it is 40 to 50% of your overall monthly income, that's just taking too much of your monthly income. Ideally, we want to be somewhere around that 20 to 25%. I believe a lot of people will allow you to go up to maybe 30%. I think 28% is kind of the standard operating procedures, but you really want to get to that 20 to 25% range because it then gives you more money that you can leave invested and growing for your overall retirement lifestyle. Number two on our list is co-signing loans. As we get into our retirement lifestyle, we have our children and our grandchildren, and they're trying to build up their credit, and we feel like we want to be able to help them. And I can appreciate that as a family person, as myself. I do tell my kids what my parents told me, which is if you want to be able to help someone, then give them the money that is going to help them. If that's what you're able to do. If you're not able to give them the money, then you shouldn't co-sign for them because you have no control over the situation, but you're completely on the hook for that situation. And you generally won't know whether or not they're making their payments on time. But when they miss a couple of payments, then you're normally the one that gets called where they reach out to you. And you don't really know what to say because you were unaware of it in the first place. And then when you reach out to the family member, you're like, hey, are you making this monthly payment? And of course, they're going to say, of course I am. I'm going to make it. And then you're almost like this middle loan collector, which is a weird situation to be in and one that you probably don't want to be in. And so if you're able to help them financially, then help them financially. But as far as co-signing for the loan, it is something that gives us a lot more risk than benefit because really what they're saying is one of two things. One is this person doesn't have a history of making good payments on their loans. They don't keep their promises, which means they're promising you that they're going to make that payment, but their history says that it's unlikely they're going to make the payment, which you're sitting there like, okay, should I be the one that's next to be disappointed? And I would say no. Number two is they're saying this monthly payment is too much for them. Now, think about that for a second. They're saying the monthly payment is too much for them to be able to maintain. You don't want to be one signing up to say, well, even though the monthly payment might be too much to maintain, I believe them when they told me that they're able to make this payment, right? So either time that you need to co-sign for someone, you're already putting yourself in a pretty rough financial situation, which is why for most people, we don't want to be co-signing for someone because it normally means those two things. And it's probably true, which means that ideally you just give them the money that you can and they have to figure out what that looks like. And it's not your job to figure it out for them. Number three on our list, we have using debt to fund your lifestyle. So there's definitely a squeeze, and we talk about it a lot. We see it with inflation. I'll put a link to one or two videos where I discuss inflation. And what we're seeing is the middle class is going into a lot of debt to maintain their middle class lifestyle. They can't actually afford that lifestyle, which sounds crazy, I know. But as the cost of things go up, it then becomes our job to reevaluate. Do I need to find ways to generate more money, or do I need to make changes that decrease my cost? As a result of most people, we are trying to fill in the gap between what I need and what I have by using credit cards to make those payments to maintain our lifestyle. The numbers show that the middle class has over $1 trillion in credit card debt just trying to maintain the lifestyle. And just last week, I saw the CEO of Walmart, and he was basically talking about inflation and these tariffs. And he was like, hey, look, let's be honest. And you and I know, right? Walmart, if you go in Walmart, most of the stuff in there is from like China and Taiwan and the Philippines and Indonesia and other relatively lower costs of living places compared to the United States. And he was trying to set expectations because generally expectation is the best performing stock when we have a recession is Walmart because Walmart is the low price leader. And because Walmart is the low price leader, when you feel the tightness of a recession, most people go to Walmart to do their shopping. So he said, Walmart investors, there's two things that you have to be wary of that we're not sure how we're going to navigate this situation. The first one is, well, if we increase our cost where the tariffs, the 25% or so that it passes on, we just increase our cost. That means we're going to maintain our margins, but less people are going to be able to buy stuff. So as a result, we think we're going to generate less revenue, even though we maintain the same margins, which you'll sit there and say, okay, I understand that, right? If your costs are higher, you pass the cost off. That means less people can afford those items. And as a result, you'll have less revenue, right? And so the Walmart says the other option we have is we maintain our revenue by keeping the cost the same. So we keep the cost the same. Everybody buys Walmart like they always do, but our margin is smaller because the costs are higher. So the revenue that we normally charge, our costs are higher, so our margin is smaller. And so Walmart said they're saying this is a decision that we're not sure how we're going to navigate just yet. We don't know whether we're going to decrease our margin or whether we're going to decrease our revenue. But we have to make that decision, and we don't know which way we're going to go yet. And so the Walmart stock went down like 6%. It was like a scary time as far as the market overreacting as it often does. So you and I know as the costs increase and our income does not keep up with inflation, then we may be using debt to fund our lifestyle. And when you retire with a fixed income, that decision comes quicker than someone who at least gets a 2 to 1% increase in their income every single year. And so we have to calculate that into our overall retirement lifestyle. We have to make sure that we have the amount that gives us the ability to ebb and flow with inflation. Now, we have investments that are generating a return that helps us to keep up with inflation. Where we're beating inflation most of the time, but sometimes we're losing to inflation, but we're not losing all the time. We can't take L's every year. That we understand that the year that inflation was literally a 40-year high, yeah, my investments didn't keep up with that. I took a little bit of an L that year, but the average inflation around 2 to 3%, I'm able to maintain and beat that amount. Because if we can't and we keep the same lifestyle that we had, we're probably using credit cards to pay that. And that's what the majority of Americans are doing. And that's why we have so much credit card debt. That's what our government does. And that's why it has so much credit card debt. And I'll do another video. I won't go into a lot of details about that. But the numbers show, and I was looking at Ray Dalio, and he was doing this interview, and he's a brilliant person. And he follows kind of that same idea that I talk about. We recognize patterns of wisdom, and you recognize how to react in certain situations because they keep happening. He's also a historian, but he obviously is much more globalist than that, huge macro investor. And he was talking about the world as a whole and the cycles of these different countries. And he was saying that the amount of debt that the United States has is something that he believes we have to figure out within the next 5 years, or it's going to implode the country as a whole. And a lot of what he was saying is our interest rates are tied to the risk of the item, right? That the riskier something is, the more they give us. So high yield, which is a very fancy way of saying junk bonds, right? We say high yield penny stocks, the companies that are very volatile and very risky. Well, if something is very volatile and very risky, do you want a higher or lower return? Of course, you want a higher return. I deserve that. I'm taking risk by giving you money. You're not a AAA rated bond out here. Well, if the United States continues with the debt, where last year we added $2 trillion onto the debt in 1 year by itself, then that means that the normal U.S. interest rates of 2%, 3%, 5%, because it's a safe grade A investment, is less and less likely. That the only way people will be continuing to give U.S. money to go further and further debt is for a higher return on their investment that takes into consideration the risk it is investing in a company that has $40 trillion plus in debt, right? And so as a result, now the U.S. is borrowing money at what? A high payday loan type of interest rate. And you and I know that that is when the debt snowball catches you. It's all fun and games when you're able to get a 0% interest rate here for 6 months, a 0% interest rate there for 12 months. But when those run out and then the credit is slowly getting worse and the new interest rates are 30%, that's more times than not when the house of cards falls down. That's for our own personal life. And that relationship is not that much more different from a government perspective. It just takes a little bit longer, but it isn't that much different. The idea is still the same. I want a return that matches the risk I'm taking. As the United States become more risky, it has to give a higher return for its investments. As the return has to get higher and the interest rates get higher, that means that we're increasing what the interest alone on the payments are, which is currently estimated to be about $1 trillion a year just in interest on the loans. And for context, I think we generate around $33, $35 trillion a year in revenue. And you're talking about taking that much that just goes on interest on the payments. It becomes a very dangerous situation. And that's why he believes the number is 5 years. I think most people acknowledge that it is unsustainable, but it is something that we should be looking at and considering when it comes to our retirement, because our retirement is 20 to 40 years. And so we have to have that multiple decade view when it comes to planning our retirement. That leads us very nicely into our fourth and final example of when debt would be considered risky, and that is high interest debt. And so in many ways, if the interest on the debt makes it almost impossible for us to get out of debt, we don't want that in retirement. We don't want debt that's either taking up too much of our monthly payment or the interest rate is so bad it's almost impossible for us to pay off. Now, granted, we did talk about a couple one-offs, which is I don't know if I care about the interest rate if I'm able to generate a certain income, a certain return that outpaces what that interest rate is. But if we're just talking about taking the money and funding a lifestyle, we're talking about just taking the money for a car or for just some expense that doesn't generate an income or return for us, then we do not want to have high interest rate debt. So that is us being considerate of our credit cards. You don't want to have a lot of credit card debt. We don't want to have to be putting our trips on credit cards. I'm okay in the sense that some people will say, well, Dre, I like to use my American Express because it gives me points and rewards and things like that. And I pay it off every single month or within like 3 months. Well, obviously that would be okay because you're paying it off. Some people will say, I don't like using my debit cards when I go out. I don't like carrying cash. It's so wonky and annoying. I like the protection of being able to separate my real money from my credit card, and my credit card company is super nice, Dre. If I call them up and tell them it's fraudulent, they'll just cut the card up, give me a new one, and then they will put a hold and investigate and make sure all the money is good. But if I do it with my actual cash and my debit card, well, that's a little bit messier because they have actual money versus just a credit card. And I was like, okay, no, I understand that. So we recognize that there are a couple of unique situations where it makes sense. But high level, when you have a credit card debt, it's more difficult to pay off. When you have high interest debt, it takes up a higher percentage of your monthly payment. You all have seen that, and that's why we have the housing crunch that we're in right now. We just came from a historically low environment where people have 3% interest rates on their mortgage, and now they're able to get a pretty nice sized house for the same monthly payment that someone right now maybe has half the size of the house, but their interest rate is also double that amount. So the interest rate is like 6, 7, 8%. And so as a result, they can't afford the same amount of house. And if they did, it would take a higher percentage of their overall income. So we always want to be mindful of high interest rates when it's not being used to generate some sort of an retirement income for us. And so the big takeaway is debt in retirement is not automatically bad. It should be intentional, it should be strategic, and it should be manageable. And that if we're able to put a plan in place that achieves all of our retirement goals, and yes, it does have us taking on some debt, but we're being mindful of the type of debt, the interest rates, how much my income is taking up, and how it impacts my overall retirement lifestyle, then I believe that you can have debt that is okay to have a retirement, but there is also some debt in retirement that we should be very mindful and we should avoid at almost all costs. I don't want to be hyperbolic, right? Like avoid at all costs, but we should be mindful and we should limit our exposure because it is something that can eat away at our retirement very quickly. If you found value in this video, I simply ask for you to like and subscribe so you continue receiving valuable insights on how to create your own wealthy retirement system. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy life.